Hello, and welcome to session 2. I am so glad that you are able to join me for a few moments to talk about one of the most important topics of all the topics when it comes to transformational preaching. And so this is a very simple and short clip, and it's going to be needed, not just for you, but for me, because I'm telling you, this one can easily slip out of our radar if we're not paying attention to it. So let me illustrate it with this story that happened to Paul. And maybe you remember this. He was visiting Ephesus. And while he was in Ephesus, there was basically a silversmith that was there. And as Paul's preaching, he's starting to convert, people that are living there. And this silversmith starts to see this as a threat to his prosperity, because he's making these idols that people are buying and taking to this temple to worship the great Diana, this pagan god that was created in the minds of people's imagination. And so he starts getting his fellow workers all riled up about this, and pretty soon the whole city starts to get into this kind of hysteria, and they're trying to find Paul, and they can't, and they're wondering where he's at, and they grab a couple of his colleagues, and they go to a place where they're chanting and yelling and screaming, and the Bible says something really, really interesting. The Bible says that some therefore cried one thing and some another, for the assembly was confused, and the more part knew not wherefore they were come together. They didn't even know why they were there. And I share this because this can happen in our church, and it's an absolute tragedy that so many sermons, including some of my own, I'm speaking from my own circumstance here, that the sermon has missed its message because Jesus was not in the message. It missed its message. The whole purpose that God has for you to go to a church to speak is so that you can speak about Jesus. But how often is it that you hear a sermon, and I hear a sermon, or I preach a sermon, and we leave there thinking, well, what was that about? Because it sure wasn't about Jesus. The Bible says in John 12, verse 32, "And I, if I be lifted up, will draw all men unto myself," or unto me. It is God's character. It's His grace. It's His love that attracts the hearts of the listeners to the Father. And it's by beholding that we become changed. And if people are not beholding Jesus in your message, then you've missed the best opportunity you could have to impact their life for the better. If we do not weave Jesus into our message, we do not recognize why God has led us to speak in the first place. Have you ever noticed that the only time we talk to our cars is when our cars are in trouble? Like, you're driving down the road and your car starts to sputter, and all of a sudden you're talking to your car like, "Oh no, don't do this to me. Don't do this to me." Or maybe you just turn your ignition and it's going click, 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 and you're thinking to yourself, that's not a good sound, but you're talking to the car and you're saying, "Oh, come on, you can start," right? And oftentimes this is the case with God, is that we're only talking to Him when we're in trouble. Otherwise, we don't talk to Him. Now, we don't talk to our cars normally because we know they can't hear us. But what God's wanting us to do when we preach is to show the personality of Jesus in our messages, because it's the personhood of Jesus who connects us to the Father. And as they behold Jesus, they're beholding the love of the Father. They're beholding the grace of the Father. They're beholding His kindness and His mercy in the loving acts and care of Jesus Christ. And so you personalize God's existence when you talk about Jesus in your sermon. So when you're preparing your sermon, make sure you're asking the question, where is Jesus in my message? You've got to ask that question over and over and over again. And if you can't find him in your message, if you can't see a main idea coming out of your message that's uplifting Jesus, then you've got to get back to your writing and change and shift it, because the power of your message is in the people beholding Jesus Christ. And so that's it for today's session. It's such an important truth. I didn't want to talk about anything else but the need for all of us to present Jesus to the listeners. The more they are seeing Jesus in your message, the more power it has to transform their heart, to change their motives, to bring a desire in their life to say, hey, you know what? I want to be more like Jesus. I want to engage with him in a personal relationship because he's such an amazing, beautiful person. Hey, blessings to you. Make sure you take some time to engage with the content below, and we'll see you tomorrow.